Welcome to another episode of Consumer Engagement in an Omnichannel World. Our co-hosts, Shri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers in store, online, and everywhere in between. And now, here are Shri and Peter.
Welcome everyone to this episode of Consumer Engagement in an Omnichannel World with Peter Bond and Shri. And today we will be taking on a very fun topic, and that has to do with career management, talent, people movement, your career journey, and most importantly, tips from our friend here to give you so that you can continue to grow in your career and reach those aspirations that you've always had. But first, a reminder to our audience, you can catch all our content on tinyurl.com/thecpgguys. I'll spell that out for you, tinyurl.com/THECPGGUYS. And when you get a chance to listen and download to the podcast of this episode on tinyurl.com/AppleCPGPodcast. And we'd love for you to review it as well as rate us. Without further ado, welcome to the one and only machine of data, CRM, analytics, and also UGC and Mr. Power Reviews himself, Peter Bond.
Shri, you are the Han Solo to my Chewie, the Snoopy to my Woodstock, and the Lennon to my McCartney. It is always a pleasure to be with you.
You just reminded me of a handheld, one of my first Nintendo handheld video games when I was 8 or 9 called Snoopy Tennis. Anybody remember that? So I'm dating myself.
We're not that old, Shri.
No.
I'm dating myself.
Sorry.
I'm dating myself. So without further ado, let's get into people and talent and how one gets ready during the current epidemic and starts to build a new future, perhaps. And so welcome, Suzanne. We're thrilled to have you on board with us. If you can take a couple minutes and tell us who you are and what you do, and we can jump right into people management.
Great. Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate being invited to participate. So a little bit about me. Out of college, I went to work for a CPG company, specifically in publishing and magazines. And I worked various roles in field sales, retail operations, sales support, had a great career there, and then found myself having to kind of reinvent myself because I got laid off, which a lot of people can probably relate to right now. There's a lot of that going on. And being in San Diego, wonderful place as it is, at that time especially, it really wasn't that great for CPG. There wasn't a lot of companies, wasn't a lot of opportunity. And, what was I going to do? But luckily, when I got laid off, they ended up hiring a broker to replace a lot of us, and the broker ended up hiring me. So even though I hadn't intended on going to work for a broker, really opened my eyes to see how the other side lives, right? The challenges and the difficulties that they had to deal with. And then ultimately, I ended up coming back to Time Inc., holding other roles as well, and then transitioning again to recruiting, which is another interesting story in itself. I got placed at a consulting firm and learned a lot about e-commerce. That was my first taste of e-commerce, by the way. And it was fascinating because every client that I was going after, and I had some really fun ones, by the way. I had Apple. I got to go to the headquarters before they opened up their big space ring kind of office. So it was pretty fun. But everybody wanted to talk about e-commerce. What am I going to do? How am I going to overcome these difficulties? It was all custom research. So I realized very quickly, I need to pay attention to this. This was where all the growth was anyway, right? We already knew that was definitely going to be from there, but how it was going to happen, we weren't really sure. We were talking about click and collect. We were talking about the drive model, but all of that was in such infancy. We didn't really know how that was going to expand. And then I ended up transitioning yet again into recruiting just because it, kind of found me, so to speak. And I realized that I wanted to make my niche in recruiting in e-commerce because of all that I had learned working at that consulting firm, because I knew it was just the area that was, everybody was talking about, and honestly, it was extremely fascinating to me. And, all of us like to be interested in what we do, right? We all need to find that passion, that experience that drives us. And that parlayed me into that. And then when I transitioned into my own organization and founded my own executive search, I also realized that, people need to talk more. They need to learn how to navigate not only their career, but also the interview process, because we don't interview every day. And it doesn't matter if you're applying to a CPG job or if you're going into transportation or logistics, whatever. We all have to have a certain skill set and be able to talk about ourselves that in a way that impacts the role we're applying for. But because we don't do that all the time, people can benefit from my years of experience and listening to some really fantastic people, so I can help them translate that into their own story so that they're successful in the process as well.
Speaking of e-commerce, I think McKinsey put out a piece of data earlier this week where it's pretty clear now, based on retail penetration, e-commerce's retail penetration in the US. Traditionally, it was growing about a point a year, and in 2020 was forecasted to be about somewhere between 15 and 16% of retail is e-com. But in 3 months, it's grown up 10 years, as in it shot all the way up to 37, 38, closer to 40. And the current predictions are, even post-epidemic, with people wanting to really go back in stores, it's going to grow up 10 years and settle in the 25s. So this has got to be a whopping time for you, Suzanne. But the question that kind of came to my mind, knowing you personally, is, you talked to us about how you change from one role to another, but how does one go from like a CPG, consumer packaged goods brokerage firm, to Time Inc., to then getting into a retail net analyst, and then end up recruiting 4 others, and then getting into executive coaching and recruiting yourself? Like, those are, in theory, while they're all anchored around the CPG industry, it's 5 functions.
Yeah, some of it was just luck. Some of it just fell in my lap and I embraced it. Other parts are, I think you really have to take some time with yourself to figure out, what really drives me, what about these roles that I was in did I really enjoy? And for me, it goes back all the way to high school. Okay. My very first job at a drugstore in my tiny little town in Central California was one of the only options in town to work at. So I went to work there, and I started taking charge of the Ray-Ban display, because they, I just like sunglasses, right? So I kept ordering things that weren't there. And then my boss, she said, well, why don't you just take charge of it? So I did. And then the sales went up. And she goes, well, why don't you take charge of this? So then I started playing around with things. So people had faith in me, to be honest, and they trusted me. And so that was something that I think that was really important. But then I also realized I like the other side of it. I like to play around. I'm very analytical. And I'm sorry to say this, Walmart, and I know every CPG company is going to be cringing at the moment, but when I worked at Walmart Pharmacy, I would take a scheduled end cap down and I would put up, something that we had a ton of stock of that I knew was going to move really quickly, especially if I did a demo. So I was just curious. So in January, what's hot? Diets. So I took all the Slim Fast and I put it on an end cap and I did demos. And then I took the tails on and I started watching the sales. That F4 function, perpetual inventory, was my favorite thing. I went around the store all the time checking the numbers. So once I realized this about myself.
I don't mean to interrupt, but when Peter and I rarely get a guest who's willing to geek out with us on end caps and perpetual inventory, you may be a first. Sorry.
Well, I started in retail. I can't help it.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. But, when you have to realize, you have to think back, what were those roles that you did? What really interested you? What were those things that you were able to accomplish in those roles? And then how can you make sure that your next role has that? Or how can you seek and find those things that you know about yourself that are really going to stimulate you and keep you going? Because it's really not up to an organization and a company to always drive you, right? You have to drive yourself as well. And who, I'd say hiring managers, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, both of you, but I'd say hiring managers really enjoy people that go the extra mile and that they don't have to handhold, right? The majority of them. What do you guys think? I mean,
I enjoy hanging out with this guy and doing stuff.
I'll tell you, Suzanne, the way I got the job that I have now was I networked my way in when I saw there was a job posting. I got to the head of HR and I said, love the job posting. I don't want that job. I want a different job. I want to talk to your CEO. and got in front of him, got him to put me in front of his management, and then wrote a 4-page SWOT analysis right after I was done to show him why I thought I was the right person for the job and where the opportunity was. So yeah, geeking out, doing an extra mile, that's how you get it done.
I love that. Yeah. That is a wonderful story.
This is the Suzanne technique of placing people, because she's been telling me for however long I've known her, one never actually applies for a job. You find a company that you're passionate about, a product you're passionate about, you make a connection based on an open job, but you really tell the company or the hiring manager what you want to do and let things just play out from there.
Yeah, the last 5 jobs I've received, it was all through my network. It was all through or my own persistence of not going the normal route of looking for a job posting and just posting for that job. I found that to be a waste of time.
But that's before we get into this, before we go further into many more things we want to ask you, I think that's a big key takeaway, number 1 for today in talent and people's career growth. Don't be shy to seek what you want as opposed to what's out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Amen. Hey, Suzanne, I have a lot of friends who are in the search business. And when the pandemic hit, a lot of them told me my business has dried up. Is that necessarily true when it comes to e-commerce? It seems to me with all of the business shifting that direction, that's where the investment should be. That's where companies should be looking. I'm curious as to what your perspective is.
Well, so it's an interesting time, right? I mentioned earlier when we first joined is that there's a lot of really talented people out there laid off, right? So to no fault of their own, I mean, it's just an unfortunate, situation with COVID. But when you have so many highly talented people available, it's much easier for the corporations to find them. So they may not need me as much. I mean, my business has also slowed down significantly, but I know it'll come back eventually. But just to give you a little perspective, it was I think it was November, I did a webinar last year, and the unemployment rate was around 3.7. So, and back then when I was doing that webinar, I was super busy because, we do have a shortage of talent and skill sets, right? We all want something immediately. And with this, current situation that we are with e-commerce jumping from 15% to 30%, and okay, maybe we're going to settle somewhere around 25, what are we missing there? Right. I've read a lot of white papers. I love all that. There's so much information out there. I know supply chain is an issue. Do we have enough e-commerce supply chain people? Do we have enough people that understand the differences between brick and mortar and e-commerce supply chain? Or are we just putting a Band-Aid on it, right? So I think that eventually it will all turn itself around. I have seen a lot of e-commerce jobs on as well, but they aren't coming to me, I'll be honest. And that's just because there's just a wealth of talent right now. And it's, and it's understandable. It will, it'll happen again, but it's just a little bit slower right now.
Okay. Speaking of, what's taken place in this country or the world in the last quarter or so, and the fact that e-commerce talent is now coming to you. I've always thought of there's talent and then there's e-commerce talent. But by the same token, when I look at my own career journey, when I first got to this country 27, 28, whenever it was years ago, and I was a waiter at the Owens Food Court in Virginia Tech, I never thought I'd actually launch a D2C supplements company. Or be the SVP of e-commerce at Revlon. But I'm also 15 years brick and mortar trained. So my DNA today is both. It's originally brick and mortar, like hardcore. So when e-commerce talent comes to you, what makes someone an e-commerce talent? Is it just that they've got that title of I've been a manager of e-commerce, I've led the Amazon team, I know how to do SEO? Is there something special? Like, how do you know the difference?
There's a couple things, right? I think, what we lose sight of sometimes when we're hiring is, are we really focusing on all the right skill sets, right? There are some hard skill sets that we need, but we can't forget about the soft skills, right? And in e-commerce, it's very dependent on the company, right? A smaller company is more nimble, more flexible. You can do things much more quickly than you can in a larger organization, less silos, things like that. So you may not need somebody that is as persuasive, right, as you would, in a large company versus a small. But I think the really important things are creativity, can deal with ambiguity, curiosity, analytical, resilient. These are all the things that come to mind because you can train a lot, right? But it also depends on where you're at in terms of what level you need for a specific role. So when I've placed people in large CPG companies, their requests are always background in brick and mortar, and then e-commerce. Now the smaller companies
Whoa. Did you just say large companies are now asking for e-commerce talent to have brick and mortar backgrounds?
Yes.
Hallelujah moment.
Well, that's all they've ever asked for me. And I think that's really important.
Wow.
There's a language barrier, right? If you have an e-commerce team that only knows e-commerce, and then you have brick and mortar that only knows brick and mortar, what do you have here? You have this huge gap. Nobody's speaking the same language to each other. And then all you're doing is butting heads, right? You're fighting, you're competing, for all these things, and nothing's really getting accomplished the way it should.
Well, you get a team on the 7th floor that's treated very special and is the rest of the organization are jealous of, but they have no funding.
I don't think that just happens on the CPG side. I've been on the retail side, and it's
is it really?
It's very much true that when the merchants go to deliver their annual plan, 5 minutes before they walk into the boardroom, they call up their e-commerce counterpart and say, can you email me over the 3 slides so I can attach them in the appendix of my deck? So that's about how close they are in many cases.
Well, I'm sure those conversations are changing a little bit right now, though. I
hope so.
Yeah, I would too. I think it's a little different. I think, but there's still some major challenges, right? Because it's still not profitable yet. And how are we going, we all want to be profitable, but who's going to figure that out and how are we going to do that?
I think you hit on something very important, which is when I saw the announcement of Instacart getting another round of funding, someone asked me, what did I think? And I said, just confirmation that absolutely no one is making money at e-commerce grocery. Not Walmart, not Instacart, not Amazon. They're just not doing it. But that doesn't mean to abandon it. It just means they got to get it right. And they're still working on it.
Yeah. So what is right? I mean, seriously.
Yeah. So you're bringing up traditionally, Suzanne, we have a script for these dialogues, but I think we're way off the script at this point. We're having fun in this conversation. But you just asked a very important question, right? What is right? Like Peter just said, and I have said it so often publicly that e-commerce dilutes the P&L. But in whose eyes, right? Like when I look at CPG, brand P&Ls over decades, and in some cases over a century, depending on how elite and how long the brand has been around, tries to deliver a certain margin, which traditionally ranges between 30 and 50%, no matter what category you're in. And, if you're a DST, because you're also owning distribution, that tends to be in the teens. But that's the brand P&L people are used to. But most CPG brands don't become retailers. They've never been retailers. Because when you take on fulfillment in retailers and you become a retailer, there's obviously cost of fulfilling. And your brand P&Ls get diluted from your amazing 30s down to the single digits, which is what we know the public data that's released. Most retailers run on a single digit P&L
right.
profit, net profit at the end of the day. And I think that's what makes it uninteresting for CPG brands, because it's a change in the P&L. But I think somewhere in there, what gets lost is I've always done it a certain way and my P&L has been a certain way. Therefore, it's wrong because it's going to dilute my P&L. What Peter and I will tell you, and you'll see this repeatedly on every episode, everything we publish, we don't forecast stuff here and we don't force anybody to do anything. All we want to do is see the transformation of the industry. So CPG brands continue to deliver quality products at value. And how do you do that if you don't follow the consumer?
Yeah, that's that. Let me double down on that, Shri. If CPG companies are not investing in a D2C strategy, simply for that reason, to be where the customers are, to learn, to own the data, to own the relationship, and understand that that's an investment in their consumer engagement strategy, then they're missing the point. If they're looking purely from is the margin comparable to my brick and mortar business, they're just going to ignore it and they're going to be left behind because their competitors understand, particularly the D2C native brands, that's where their consumers are, and they're going to miss the train.
So Suzanne, that leads me to ask you this very pointed question. So when large companies are asking you for talent, like my own career journey, brick and mortar, I can only have this discussion with you, Peter can, about 15% margins and single digits, et cetera, 30s, because we've done it. But isn't that also something that holds some of these people back? Because when they walk over to the e-commerce world and they come with this talent, they're thinking, I got to deliver a 30 margin versus doing what's right for the consumer.
Well, I think at the end of the day, the company always wants to do what's right for the company, right? It's not going to be completely about the consumer. It's and it has to be some sort of balance.
Takeaway number 2.
Yeah. But I think where it's difficult, the larger the company, the more difficult that is to get it through, right? And I know I've heard you speak before, Shri, about I had to knock on the door 90 times before, they started to listen, right? And I remember, I don't know, I think it was 5 years ago, I was at a trade show and somebody was getting up to speak, an e-commerce expert, and he said, I spent 40% of my time just trying to push through my agenda for my team. And that's exhausting. Right. And I've heard that several times. It's definitely getting better. So that's positive. I think, a lot of companies are realizing, and I saw a big shift with all the native brands really, starting to make a dent and gaining popularity and doing something different. I've shared before that one of my favorite presentations was at Grocery Shop when the CMO of RX Bar got up and started talking about how everyone was saying they were doing everything wrong. Like their packaging was terrible. Like you can't just put 4 simple ingredients on the packaging. That's ridiculous. You can't sell direct to consumer. How are you going to do that? It's just all these things they said that they couldn't do, yet they did it. Right. So, and if I think about even myself as a consumer right now and how I'm shopping, I've bought more things on Instagram since COVID started than I ever have. And now I feel like that's going to stay because not only am I getting a feed full of these D2C things, but it's really interesting and it's different. And I want to purchase it because, I want to see how the process works. I'm very curious as well. But I think a lot of people are doing more of that. So to your point, I think, D2C is here to stay. And if they don't take a seat at the table, they're going to get passed over. Right. So there was.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say one last thing. It was very interesting when I started recruiting. Everybody wanted, this is probably about 7 years ago, everybody wanted people with Amazon experience. It was all about Amazon, right? Amazon. I only want Amazon people. That's it. And then it kind of shifted to Amazon advertising. I just need people that understand Amazon advertising. I said, all right, got it. Then it went to, click and collect. We got to have people that have click and collect. That's a big one too. And now it's getting a lot more traction about the Walmart.com, especially because Walmart's making a huge play, right, with their marketplace. And to a lesser extent, Target, and the other .coms. So a lot more attention because there's just more people available now that have the Amazon experience and the Amazon advertising. But we have some other retailers that are pushing really heavily to the brands to participate, right? Because we need them and they need them as well. So it's been an interesting shift. But that tells the audience something, is that it's not just enough to have only Amazon.com experience, number one. And I highly recommend putting your head over your colleague's shoulder and learning about Walmart.com or Target.com or whatever other .com. I think you can get some valuable insight there. But additionally, do not assume that your e-commerce experience only will carry you throughout your entire career. Brick and mortar is here to stay. And you still, if you want to get into that C-suite, you really do need to have that brick and mortar experience.
Takeaway number 4 has been registered.
You're giving him too many easy sound bites here. This is bad. We gotta stay away from the dreaded 5-letter word that Shri loves to talk about, and you just touched on that with the second part of the Amazon. So let's put it aside. We've talked a lot about your search business, but you also do coaching business for candidates. I'd sure love to know from your perspective, what is it you're finding that drives the most value for them, particularly for, say, people who are looking to get into the e-commerce space that don't have, because it's easy when you talk to, I'm sure when you talk to a client to say, find me someone with the exact same job at another company.
Right, exactly.
But with the transition, what are some of the areas that you find particularly valuable to your personal clients in coaching them for success in making that pivot?
Well, if they want to make that pivot, the easiest way to do that is within the organization they're already in. You know, because if you try to go apply for a job, you know, as a national account manager or key account manager on Amazon, it's not going to happen. You don't have any experience with Amazon. It'd be really, really difficult to do that, because you really need to have somebody in those positions that understand it. You know, a great starter position, if you're coming out of college and you want to, you want to get into this area, is an analyst, right? A digital analyst, e-commerce analyst, something like that. Typically the college kids are coming out very well versed in Excel, which is super important in e-commerce. And so they can step in because they already have those key skills. And then they can just, train them and they can learn the ropes and move on from there. But if you're, in the middle of your career, or perhaps, you're at the manager level, honestly, the best way to go is to do it within your own organization. Now, let's say your own organization doesn't have an e-commerce business, then I would transition in a lateral move or a slightly, elevated level in another company, and then work your way up to that. You're just not going to walk into that kind of role.
So Suzanne, let's take a situation of someone, because you're coaching up and down all levels. Let's take someone more senior. So I think it's very clear, takeaway number 5 established for if you're in the middle of your career, you're starting out your career, very clear. What if you're more seasoned and you're 20 years into your career, a couple of decades, you've run the grocery channel, I'll just make it up, for Coca-Cola. So there's no one better than you in the grocery channel. You've been a GM of a $5 billion business. And now you now realize after this epidemic, hey, for my continued success to become the chief customer officer, I also need to know e-com. What do you do in that case? Like, how do you suddenly transition into a GM of e-com, or are you doomed?
Well, I think you participate. I have never had a job in my entire life that I ever just stuck within the confines of that job. I was always doing something else. So I think that you just have to interject yourself into the conversation, ask questions, learn, grow, and develop. And then you get smart enough. You spend some time on your own outside of the office. I mean, look at all this great content everywhere. We can watch your show. There's webinars. There's so much stuff going around. You can participate and learn and read and ask questions and develop that so that you have the ability to have that conversation within your own organization, so that you can eventually, hopefully, move into that type of position. But it really is going to be up to the company. And just to share one quick story of a recent candidate I had. I've known this woman for a long time, love her to death. She's great in Amazon, great experience. And she joined an organization where her boss knows absolutely nothing about e-commerce, absolutely nothing. And she's just miserable. She's miserable. Everybody that was there when she was hired is now gone because they can't function. He's not allowing them to do their job. So now she's looking, which is really unfortunate. Had this person taken the time to really get to understand what's needed and what's necessary to grow the e-com business, how to best support it, how they can come together and speak the same language and communicate, this could have been a well-rounded group of people and could be very successful. But that is not uncommon. I hear that a lot. And so, I think we need to not be afraid of the newness of e-commerce and the growth that it has. Instead, embrace it and learn from it so that we can all be better off, because it benefits the company and the organization.
So I think we just established takeaway number 6, participate. And just for the record, Mr. Bond, no offense, when all gloom and doom shows up, that's when you rely on the Yankee pitch hitters. Luke Voigt, grand slam yesterday.
I'm sorry, the Yankees and Roger Clemens, that famous great Yankees pitcher, and we'll go on from
The
there.
jealousy of 27-6, Yankees 27, Dodgers 6. We talk when you get to double digits.
Would have been 8 if not for the cheating Astros and Red Sox, but we'll just leave it. We'll leave it there.
Oh, hey, I'm with you on the cheating Red Sox.
Yeah. Suzanne, I'm curious where you source most of your candidates. Is it your extensive network? Are you using LinkedIn? What do you do if someone comes to you with a search, how do you think about finding the right set of candidates for them?
Well, that's a multi-part answer there. So I'm going to start with my process. So my process is I get a job description, right? But the hiring manager likely did not write the job description. So it's something that's been in HR. It has to be approved. There's all kinds of things that are involved with putting a job description, right? So the first thing I do is I sit down with the hiring manager and I ask them what is not on the job description. Just tell me.
How interesting.
Yeah, tell me what you're looking for.
Do they like to hear that question, or are they like taken aback?
I usually get a little moment of silence, because I'm not exactly accusing them of not reading it, but at the same time, I know there's more to it.
You're holding them accountable.
Number 7, read.
I have a job to do and I want to be successful. If I just go to the job description and I go based off of that, it may take me longer to fill the role. But if I just straight out ask you, what's not on here, what's missing, tell me what I need to do so that I can get this done in a timely manner, then we're all moving along, right? I don't like to have to redo anything. So I start with that. And then I go through and I start thinking, and I have built a network over the last 8 years that's extensive. I spend a lot of time with people. I get to know them, and I don't just talk to them when I'm filling a role. I talk to them outside of that. So I get to know the people very well, because you know what? Hey, 5 years ago, you may have wanted a different role. Maybe you wanted something where you focused more on Amazon, and today you want to be more on the click and collect side, or you want to work somehow with Instacart. I don't know, but you may have changed.
Number 7, you need to spend time investing in building your network. It doesn't just kind of happen.
Exactly.
Well said,
and it takes a lot of effort. It's a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of phone calls, but it pays off in the end. And honestly, that's the value I bring as a recruiter is my network. I've spent a lot of time with that, and I can get to those people typically a lot easier than the actual in-house recruiter can, because I represent multiple organizations where an in-house will only represent one. So I've actually had candidates tell me that they'll talk to me before they'll talk to the in-house recruiter.
And I've got to imagine that doing this is all about making sure that the person you place there is the right person, that they're happy, the company is happy. And I'm kind of curious on those occasions where either the company's not happy or the person is not happy. What do you look to learn from that, and how does that contribute to future searches that you're conducting?
Well, I'm selling exceptional, right? I'm only presenting exceptional candidates. So I work really hard to try to not have that happen. But yes, it has happened. Absolutely. I'm at the mercy of the information that I'm getting from one person. I'm at the mercy of the hiring manager's opinion of what's going on. And sometimes there are unforeseen instances. This happened to me a couple of years ago. The hiring manager ended up leaving 2 days before the new hire started. Wow, that was exciting. So I called my candidate and I said, well, how are you feeling about this? Because I want to make sure, he's walking into blind. Who am I reporting to now? What's going on? What's the structure? It's very intimidating. And it wasn't just a move across town. It was a move across country. Okay, so this is a big deal. And so I said, let's set up a call. So I set up a call so we could talk to new management. They got on the phone. Everything seemed fine. But then they called me a couple months later and he wasn't the one. Well, after some digging, I found out the new hiring manager does not have the same plan for this role that the old hiring manager did. So it was a completely different set of skills that this guy wanted versus the person we had just hired. So because I am a guaranteed service. I guaranteed my candidates, I had to refill the position, which I did. But now that's twice as much.
What does that mean, guarantee a candidate? I've never heard
I guarantee placement. So the standard guarantee is 90 days. So you have 90 days to decide whether or not this is the right person. So if day 89 comes around and you say, you know what, this isn't working out, we need to start looking again, I'm obligated to refill the position with no additional charge.
Mm-hmm.
So
wow.
It's in my best interest to get it right the first time, which is why I ask so many questions and why I'm at the mercy of what I'm being told. The guy wasn't going to tell me he was leaving the company, which I understand. And, he has to do what's best for him. I totally understand it. And that is rare, by the way. But it happens. You have to roll with it.
So I want to flip to a slightly different world because I think it came up earlier. The word direct to consumer, which I call it the kryptonite of CPG, D2C. And we've discussed a lot about P&Ls, et cetera. If there's one area of talent which doesn't look the same as the rest of e-com, like Amazon and coming with a brick and mortar experience, D2C is not the same because for the first time, you're also a retailer. And it seemed that word is now really coming out in prominence, and very large brands who've never been retailers are now, should I get into the D2C business? But, in discussions with you, Suzanne, and seeing what's in the market, what I've learned is there's a lot more action in D2C. If you're private equity, you're a small company, you're a startup, those skill sets in those sort of small brands, 50 million and below, private equity backed, are not the same as D2C skill sets in large brand. Are they? Like, is that a viable career option for somebody, for a large brand who really wants to go pursue a career in e-commerce, to really look at PE and small businesses and try to make that flip into what's going to be arguably much more D2C?
Well, I think I never deal in absolutes. I don't like absolutes. So I think there's always a way. You just have to.
Number 8, don't deal in absolutes. I feel like I got an English language lesson of verbs.
Keep it fuzzy.
Yeah.
So I think if you're dedicated to what you want to do, you've established that that's what you like and how you fit into that mold or what you think that mold is. But again, I'm very hesitant about absolutes, but I think that you just go for it, right? Now, it's much more difficult for somebody from a large organization to go to a small. And the reason is small companies want people that can really handle change. And I'm talking major change that happens like from one moment to the next. It is exhausting at times. It taxes all of your energy. It taxes your mind. Am I going to be successful in this? You kind of wonder, is this even going to happen, right? It's moments like that are difficult. And you possibly are dealing with a founder who can be very intense. It can be a little difficult to work with a founder that is so heavily invested because it's their baby. Completely understandable. But you have to understand at the same time, in order to bring out the best in your people, they have to like you. They have to want to work with you. I know it's a dumb moment.
Number 9, be likable.
Be likable. I mean, it's like, I totally get it, but you've got to trust the people that you hire to put in those positions, spend the money to get the right people too, right? And in smaller organizations, there is a trade-off. You aren't going to make as much money, but you are going to get a wealth of experience in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, I love what you say about the CEO because as an example, 2 days ago, my boss came to me and said, our CEO has to give a big presentation. I really want your help in the speaker notes and guiding the conversation. And I worked with him on it. And later that night, I got an email from my CEO saying, hey, your boss told me that it helped him work. So I just want you to know how greatly appreciative I am of that.
Oh, that's so nice.
That's why I love working for him, because he's a great leader and he takes the time to thank you for the little things, just like the big things. So I hear you there. My last question for you is around the job seeker themselves and getting attention of search consultants. When my friends are looking for work, they call me and say, hey, can you give me some great recruiters? The big guys, Russell Reynolds, whatever. And I say, that's a fool's errand. And they say, why? And I say, because if you get contacted by someone for, say, a big loyalty role at McDonald's, knowing that person, and you end up not getting that role, but you want to look for that role somewhere else, he's not the right, or he or she are not the right person for you, because while they may be in a particular vertical like QSR, they're assigned to a client. So the next role that they're going to find is not another CRM role. It's maybe an operations role, or it's something else, but it's for that client. So I've always shied away from trying to go out and hunt for big recruiters at some of the big firms. How does someone really fine-tune themselves to draw the attention of professionals in search as a potential candidate for roles? I'm really curious as to what you recommend.
Well, I do both, actually. I have those roles where I'm only hired by corporations and very specific things, and I may not have something else like that in another year or two. Who knows, right? I've definitely have that. But I also have developed very strong relationships with some of my clients that just want good people. And they tell me, when you find somebody, just send them to me.
Yeah.
And so I have that kind of relationship as well. But there are specific recruiters like you just mentioned, but they are very expensive. You have to pay them a fee, and you discuss, the things that you're looking for, the companies you're interested in. They help you fine tune your resume. They take you through the whole interviewing process. They really fine tune your skills. Mm-hmm. And then they blast your resume out to those companies and push you in that way. I don't typically do that, but I do prepare you for that type of scenario for you to do it yourself. So, just like the example you gave earlier, Peter, that was awesome. If you identify a company that you really like, go for it. Find a way to knock down the door and get in there just by picking up the phone and just starting a conversation. I love that you said you did a SWOT analysis. That's awesome. I do those all the time. I go to the grocery store and I see a new product and I'm like, whoa, okay, what is this? Where are they at? What are they doing? I take a picture. I have taken pictures at retail and I've sent them to the president of the organization. Great job.
Do a SWOT analysis.
Yeah, SWOT analysis.
A funny story related to that, Suzanne. About 15 years ago, my college roommate and I were doing a West Coast golf and wine trip. And at one point we were in Paso Robles. And there's a picture that my friend took of us. It was two guys, two sets of golf clubs, all of our luggage, and 8 cases of wine in a Mini Cooper. And I sent it to my buddy who was the VP of marketing at BMW at the time. And he said, I put that on my door with the email you wrote to me so that everyone who came in read that because that was absolutely phenomenal. So taking the time to do things like that, or when I'm on vacation, I get up at 6 a.m. It drives my wife crazy. I go out and do store checks and wherever I am. Yes. Back when we used to travel. Because right. I like you. I love to go into the stores and see what's new.
Oh my gosh. My favorite thing is to take somebody who doesn't know anything about retail or CPG and walk the store and talk them through category management, shopper marketing. Like I just go through it all. And it's just so much fun. And then to just sit there sometimes and watch how consumers pull things off the shelf. Are they reading the box? Are they just dumping it in? Are they looking at a list? All these things. Like I used to love heat maps. I miss the heat maps from Kantar.
Suzanne, you are the real deal. Some executive recruiter, a recruiter who talks about walking into the store and showing people displays, is ready to geek out about projections, is ready to geek out about data, possibly Nielsen, IRI, whatever it takes, and can go the spectrum. Suzanne, you're such a rare breed because you can go the spectrum, and you've done it with me, where you can talk about a lobby display, and by the same token, we can swing over to SEO, title-based SEO, and UGC that delivers ratings and reviews, and Salsify as a PIM. That is pretty amazing. But I'm looking at the time slot here, and when you have an amazing topic like this, time just flies by. And I want to remind all our audience, we just crossed 300 organic followers on LinkedIn. I want to thank you for the love and for following us and also chiming in on the conversations with us. We are also well on our way to 2,000 organic downloads of our podcast alone on Apple. And I want to thank you for all the clicks, likes, and sharing that you do of our podcasts. I want to thank you, Peter, as always, week over week, for hopping on board and coming and sharing your views on consumer engagement in an omni-channel world. Again, we would love for our listeners and audience, when you get a moment, when you download and listen to this podcast, go to tinyurl.com Apple CPG podcast. And if you'd leave a rating and a review, we would really appreciate it. Suzanne, thank you so much for making time for us today and engaging in this passionate topic of ours, which is people and talent. We hope you'll come back once this epidemic is over and we can look back and see how the world of recruiting, talent management, and people movement has changed. With that, I'll close out this episode. Thank you, everybody, and catch you soon on the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye, everyone. The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPGGUYS LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPGGUYS LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPGGUYS LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPGGUYS LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.